In the distance, a soft, desperate sound echoed against the stillness, a faint, sorrowful cry. Alone, lying in the snow, a small figure huddled, trembling with the cold, her body shivering uncontrollably. She had been left to die. A bag stained with dirt and old blood lay next to her, a cruel reminder of how far her fate had fallen. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, was abandoned by the very people who should have cared for her. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the night sky, filled with confusion and fear, unable to understand why she was left to face the freezing cold alone. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Mama!" Her words were choked with sorrow and desperation, but no one was there to hear her cry for help. Her frail form was too small to be noticed, too fragile to survive in this harsh world. But someone did hear her. In the shadows, a figure emerged. A soldier, tired from a long deployment, walked alongside his K9 companion. The soldier had seen too much, lost too much, and yet he walked with purpose. His dog, a massive German shepherd, stood alert by his side, sensing something was wrong. The soldier's eyes scanned the surroundings as he knelt down, his trained hand brushing over the snow, the cold biting into his fingers. The dog's sharp eyes locked onto the ground. The soldier's heart raced. Something wasn't right. His years of training kicked in, his instincts screaming at him to be careful, but it was the faint cry that struck him hardest. He turned to his dog. "Shadow, what's that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the howl of the wind. The dog growled low, ears perked up, as if he too understood the urgency. Without waiting for his master, the dog rushed ahead, guiding the soldier through the snow, following the scent of the desperate child. And then they saw her. Lying in the snow, the girl's body curled into a ball, barely alive. Shadow, the K9, approached her cautiously, his trained nose sniffing the air, ensuring no threats lingered nearby. The soldier's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced through memories of lost friends, of battles fought and lives saved. He couldn't leave this girl to die, not on his watch. He knelt down, his hand trembling as he gently touched her frail arm. The girl's eyes fluttered, and for a moment she seemed to recognize that someone was there. A glimmer of hope sparked in her eyes. "Can you hear me?" The soldier's voice was soft, his tone filled with compassion. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small blanket, wrapping it around the little girl's fragile frame. She looked up at him, her lips quivering. "Can I keep him, Grandma?" she whispered, her voice weak and cracking. She was speaking of Shadow, the K9, whose eyes now met hers with an understanding that only a dog could offer. He was her protector now, just as he had been for the soldier in the past. The soldier's chest tightened. He had been here before, but this time it was different. He was no longer a soldier fighting wars on foreign soil. He was a man trying to save a child. And as much as he wanted to, he couldn't help but wonder, was he doing this for her, or for the part of him that had been lost in the chaos of battle? The little girl clung to Shadow, her hand reaching out to him as though he were her lifeline. "Please, don't leave me," she whispered, her small voice trembling with fear. The soldier looked at his dog, then back at the girl. "You're not alone anymore." "We'll take care of you," he promised, his voice filled with conviction. But as the soldier lifted her into his arms, the wind howled louder, and a sense of danger crept through the air. This was only the beginning. The soldier could feel it in his bones, the darkness that threatened to pull them all under, the girl's past, the enemies that lurked in the shadows, and the painful memories that followed him would all collide in ways he couldn't predict. But for now, in this moment, he had one mission: to save her, and he would not fail. As the soldier cradled the little girl in his arms, his mind raced with thoughts of the past, of the battles fought, the comrades lost, and the lives forever changed by war. His hand, still clutching the dog's leash, instinctively tightened, feeling the reassuring pull of his K9 companion. Shadow, his constant companion through the darkest of times, remained calm, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the precision that only a well-trained dog possessed. But even in the silent, icy stillness of the abandoned district, the soldier felt the weight of danger bearing down on them. The soldier was no stranger to peril. He had fought in wars, been to places where death was a constant companion, and yet this situation felt different. The icy wind cut through his military jacket, but it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. It was the weight of responsibility. The girl in his arms was more than a lost soul. She was a chance at redemption, a lifeline he never expected to hold. He glanced down at her fragile face. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow but steady. There was a peace in her expression that didn't match the danger they were about to face. It was the calm before the storm. He had no idea who had abandoned her or why she had been left to die on this cold, desolate street. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let her face the same fate as his lost comrades, the ones who had fought bravely and sacrificed everything only to be forgotten. As the soldier adjusted his grip on the girl, he noticed Shadow was now standing alert, his nose raised to the wind. There was something in the air, something he couldn't quite place, but that his canine partner sensed immediately. The dog's growl broke the silence. "Easy, Shadow," the soldier muttered, but he understood. Shadow had been trained to detect threats, bombs, danger, and even the scent of fear. It wasn't the first time the dog had sensed danger, and it wouldn't be the last. The soldier scanned the area, his mind calculating. The streets were empty, the houses abandoned. It was a place where only the brave or the foolish would dare venture. But he had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and they were screaming at him to move fast, to get out of there before the danger found them. The wind howled louder, and the snow began to fall heavier, as though nature itself was conspiring against them. He could see the small, snow-covered tracks leading into the alleyway, a narrow, dark passage between two buildings. The faintest trace of blood stained the snow. Without hesitation, he took a step toward the alley, his feet crunching in the snow. Shadow's growls grew louder as the dog moved ahead, his senses on high alert. The soldier followed closely, his hand tightening on the little girl's body as he pressed her closer to him for warmth. As they moved deeper into the alley, the soldier's mind raced. Who would do this? Who could leave an innocent child to die in such a cold, cruel manner? Then a voice, low and threatening, cut through the air. "You're in the wrong place, soldier." The soldier froze. The voice was gravelly, laden with malice. His instincts flared, but he held his ground. He didn't know who or what lay ahead, but he knew one thing. He wasn't leaving without the girl. Shadow, sensing the threat, moved forward, his body tense, ready to spring into action. The soldier's hand rested on the dog's back, as if to tell him to stay, but both of them knew better. The canine was trained for situations just like this. A figure stepped from the shadows, a man, tall and menacing, dressed in a dark leather jacket, with the unmistakable air of someone who had nothing left to lose. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the soldier and the girl in his arms. "I'm not asking again," the man growled, his hand slowly moving toward the gun, holstered at his side. "Give her to me." The soldier's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained calm. He knew that fear would only cloud his judgment. The situation was escalating, but he wasn't about to let this man take the girl, no matter what. "You don't want to do this," the soldier said, his voice steady, but with an edge of warning. His hand instinctively moved to the gun tucked beneath his jacket, but Shadow was already ahead of him. With a sudden bark, the dog lunged, knocking the man's arm away from his weapon. The soldier, taking advantage of the momentary distraction, sprang forward. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the fight-or-flight response kicking in as his mind focused solely on the girl in his arms. But the man was fast. He recovered quickly, his fist swinging toward the soldier's face. The soldier ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow, but the man's second punch landed hard, against his jaw. He staggered back, but Shadow was there again, biting down hard on the man's leg, forcing him to the ground. "Get her out of here," the soldier shouted, his voice raw with urgency. Shadow immediately released the man, but the soldier knew the fight wasn't over. There were more of them out there, more people who wanted the girl. He had to act quickly, or they'd both be lost. The soldier, his jaw throbbing, turned to face the girl in his arms. Her eyes were wide with fear, her tiny hands clutching at his jacket. But there was something else, something deeper in her gaze. It was as though she had seen this kind of violence before, as though she had come from a world that no child should know. "I'm not going to let them hurt you," the soldier whispered fiercely, before turning to Shadow. "Let's move." The dog growled softly in response, his tail stiff with alertness. The soldier wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running, but they had no choice. The alley was still, but the soldier's senses were heightened. The danger was far from over, and now they were not just running from the cold, they were running for their lives. The soldier's breath came in sharp, jagged gasps as he sprinted down the alley, the girl still cradled tightly in his arms. The snow had begun to fall heavier, the weight of the cold pressing down on him. His boots crunched in the frozen streets, and the distant sounds of footsteps echoed in the alley behind him. The man who had attacked them was not the only danger out there. It was clear now. Whoever had left this girl to die wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Shadow ran ahead, his paws light and fast, cutting through the snow like a shadow in the night. The dog had always been the soldier's most trusted companion, ever since they were first paired together during his military service. In every battle, every mission, Shadow had been by his side, a constant source of strength and loyalty. But as they moved deeper into the empty streets, the soldier's thoughts turned inward. He couldn't help but think of how much Shadow reminded him of his old comrades, the ones who had stood by him through the toughest of times, the ones who had fallen. His mind flashed back to a moment long ago, to a time when the weight of the world had seemed too much to bear. The soldier had been deployed overseas, deep in enemy territory. His unit had been tasked with a dangerous mission, one that went wrong almost immediately. The firefight had been intense, and in the chaos the soldier had been separated from his team. But Shadow had found him. Through the smoke, the gunfire, and the dust, Shadow had never left his side. He had tracked the soldier through enemy lines, saved his life more times than he could count, and had always been there when it mattered most. That was the bond they shared. It wasn't just a matter of training or discipline, it was something deeper. Something that went beyond words. But it wasn't just Shadow who had become part of the soldier's world. The soldier's thoughts turned to his wife, Sarah. She had been his rock when he came home from the war, but the wounds of war ran deep, and no matter how much he tried, he couldn't escape them. His nightmares, the PTSD, the fear that he would lose everything. Every night he woke up in cold sweats, haunted by the faces of his fallen comrades. Sarah had tried to be patient with him, tried to understand, but in the end, the distance between them had grown too wide. She had left, taking their young son with her. The soldier couldn't blame her. After all, who could live with a man who was so broken, so haunted by his past? She had given him an ultimatum: get help or lose them both. But by the time he realized how much he had hurt her, it was too late. They were gone. Now here he was, standing in the middle of a cold, deserted street, cradling a girl who had been abandoned, just like him. She had no family, no one to protect her. And just like his fallen comrades, she had been left behind. But he wasn't going to leave her. The soldier pushed his grief aside, focusing on the task at hand. They had to get out of the open. As much as he hated to admit it, the odds were stacking against them. They were up against people who had no problem taking a life. But the soldier had made a promise to the girl and to himself that he wasn't going to let her become another casualty in his life. "Hang in there," he whispered to her, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We're almost there." She didn't respond, but her small fingers tightened around his jacket, clinging to him like she had nowhere else to go. Her frail body trembled, but there was an unspoken trust in her gaze. She had no one else, but she had him, and for now, that was enough. Suddenly, Shadow's ears perked up. The dog stopped in his tracks, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The soldier tensed, his hand instinctively going to the gun, holstered at his side. The air had shifted, and in the stillness of the alley, a new sound filled the space. Footsteps, growing closer, too many for him to fight off alone. "They're here," the soldier muttered. He didn't need to look behind him to know the threat was closing in. The footsteps were steady, deliberate, like the approach of a predator stalking its prey. He motioned for Shadow to stay close and moved toward a nearby building, ducking behind a stack of crates. His heart pounded in his chest as he crouched down, keeping his body low, the girl still in his arms. Shadow followed, but the dog remained tense, his body coiled, waiting for the command to spring into action. The soldier's fingers brushed the cold metal of his gun, but he didn't pull it out yet, not until he had no other choice. The footsteps were almost upon them when the soldier heard the voice again, the same man from earlier. "You can't hide forever," the man called out, his voice echoing off the walls of the alley. The soldier's pulse quickened. The man was close, but so was his opportunity. He could feel it in his gut. He had trained for moments like this, for the kind of pressure that would break weaker men, but he wasn't going to break. "Shadow," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Go." The K9 sprang into action, his body a blur as he moved swiftly toward the sound of the footsteps. The soldier wasn't far behind, but he had one mission: to keep the girl safe. The chase was on. The alley seemed to stretch on endlessly, winding through the back streets of the forgotten city. The soldier's heart raced as he dashed forward, his feet slipping on the snow-packed ground, but his focus remained unwavering. He could hear the heavy breathing of Shadow ahead of him, the sound of claws scraping against the concrete, and then the sudden bark that echoed through the narrow path. The soldier knew that the K9 had found something, or someone. He quickened his pace, clutching the girl tightly against him, his fingers numb from the cold. His breath came out in visible puffs as he moved faster, adrenaline now coursing through his veins. His thoughts were razor-sharp. They had to escape. They had to get to safety. But as he rounded the corner of the alley, his eyes widened. Shadow was standing over a man, pinning him to the ground with all the force of a trained, battle-hardened dog. The soldier could see the man's face now, twisted in shock and anger. He was the same man from before, the one who had threatened them, but now he was helpless, at the mercy of the K9. The soldier's hand went instinctively to his weapon, but he hesitated. The girl in his arms stirred, her fragile body clinging to him as if she understood the gravity of the situation. The soldier's eyes flickered from the man to the dog, then back to the girl, who seemed to be holding her breath, her wide eyes staring at the scene in front of her. The tension in the air was suffocating, a fragile moment before everything either erupted or settled. You don't know what you're dealing with," the man growled through clenched teeth, his voice hoarse with fear. He struggled against Shadow's grip, but the K9's teeth were sunk deep into the man's arm, ensuring he couldn't move. The soldier took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. In the end, this wasn't about fighting or victory. It was about protecting the girl, keeping her safe from the people who had abandoned her, from the monsters who had used her as a pawn in some twisted game. With a cold, determined voice, the soldier spoke. "Get up!" "Now," he ordered, his words sharp as ice. "You're coming with me." The man's eyes flashed with a mix of rage and disbelief. He had been expecting a fight, but he hadn't counted on a soldier who had nothing left to lose. "Not happening, soldier," the man spat. "You don't know what's coming. You don't know who you're dealing with." The soldier's gaze hardened. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with, And you're not going to hurt anyone else, Shadow, sensing the growing tension, let out a low growl. The soldier didn't flinch. He had no time for games. His mission was clear: protect the girl and neutralize the threat. The man, still pinned by the K9, finally stopped struggling, his face pale from fear. "You don't understand," he muttered. "You can't protect her." "They'll come for you, for both of you." The soldier ignored him, his eyes narrowing as he glanced around. The city was still eerily quiet, but something about the man's words unsettled him. Who was he talking about? Who was they? "I don't care who they are," the soldier said coldly, moving closer to the man. "All I care about is getting this girl to safety." Without warning, he stepped forward, his hand gripping the man's collar. "And if you try to stop me again," the soldier said, his voice low and filled with menace, "you won't get the chance." The man swallowed hard, his breath coming in short gasps. He glanced from the soldier to Shadow, then back to the soldier, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. The soldier wasn't here to negotiate. He wasn't here to compromise. He was here to protect the girl, and nothing, no one, would stand in his way. The soldier motioned for Shadow to release the man. The dog obeyed instantly, pulling away and stepping back, his eyes still locked on the man with an unwavering gaze of dominance. The soldier knew this was the moment. The man would either walk away, or he would force the soldier to take more drastic measures. The man staggered to his feet, wiping the snow from his jacket, but he didn't make a move to run. Instead, he stood there, staring at the soldier with a mix of fear and admiration. "You're making a mistake," the man muttered. "Maybe," the soldier said, his voice hard, "but I'm willing to take that risk." He motioned for the girl to stay close, her tiny hand still gripping his arm. He knew she was scared, that she had seen too much, but he couldn't let her see any more fear. Not now. As they moved toward the next street, the man watched them go, still frozen in place. The soldier's steps were purposeful, each one carrying them closer to the only thing that mattered, the safety of the girl. He wasn't sure where they would go next, but for now he would keep her close, keep her out of danger. As they rounded another corner, the soldier's heart sank. There, standing at the end of the street, were two more figures, tall and imposing, blocking the way forward. It seemed the chase wasn't over, but the soldier wasn't afraid. He had been through worse, and if he had to, he would face whatever came next. He turned to Shadow. The dog stood tall, ready for anything. "We fight," the soldier whispered, his voice fierce. The two figures at the end of the street stood motionless, like statues carved from the night itself. Their silhouettes loomed in the mist of falling snow, broad-shouldered, heavy boots crunching against the frozen pavement as they stepped forward in unison. The soldier's grip on the girl tightened, her tiny fingers clutching desperately at his jacket as though she could feel the dread radiating from the men. Shadow stood rigid at his side, a low rumble vibrating from his chest, ears pricked and ready. The soldier shifted his stance, every muscle in his body tensed, not from fear, but from readiness. He had been trained for this. He had been broken and rebuilt in fire, sharpened into a weapon that could endure any battlefield. Yet this was different. This wasn't a foreign land or an enemy uniform. This was his home, his streets. And here he was, a lone man with a K9 and a child in his arms, standing against shadows that threatened to swallow them whole. "Stay behind me," he whispered to the girl. She buried her face into his chest, her shivering body seeking the warmth of his words more than his arms. One of the men stepped closer, his voice carrying easily through the cold air. "Hand over the girl, soldier. No one has to get hurt." The soldier's jaw tightened. He could feel the storm raging inside him, the old instincts of obedience, the echo of orders barked by superiors in combat. But this time, there was no chain of command. There was no mission brief. The only thing that mattered was the child clinging to him and the dog standing guard by his side. "I'm not handing her over," the soldier replied firmly, his voice steady like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Not to you. Not to anyone." The men exchanged glances as though they had expected this response. Then the second figure pulled something from beneath his coat. A length of steel pipe glinted in the faint streetlight. The soldier's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. He shifted his weight, adjusting his stance to free one arm, while keeping the girl secure against him. Shadow's growl deepened. The German shepherd's entire body was taut, waiting for a single command. The first man smirked, stepping closer. "You think you can take us both on?" "You're broken. We know who you are. We know what you've lost." The words cut deeper than any blade. Memories surged, his wife's voice trembling as she told him goodbye. His son's small face pressed against the window of a car as it drove away. The comrades who never came home. Each loss a wound that had never healed. The soldier felt his chest tighten, but he forced the ghosts back. He couldn't afford to break here, not now, not when someone depended on him again. "You don't know me," he growled, his voice raw with restrained fury. "And you'll never touch her." The man with the pipe lunged forward. Instantly, the soldier twisted, placing the girl gently behind a stack of crates. "Stay down!" he commanded, his voice sharp but protective. She crouched low, eyes wide with fear, watching the chaos about to unfold. The pipe whistled through the air, but the soldier ducked, his body moving on instinct. He drove his fist upward, striking the man in the ribs with enough force to stagger him back. At the same moment, Shadow launched himself at the second attacker, teeth flashing, a blur of fur and muscle colliding with human flesh. The man's cry of pain split the night as the canine clamped onto his arm, dragging him to the ground. The soldier moved quickly, delivering another blow to the man with the pipe, sending him sprawling into the snow. His breath came heavy, adrenaline surging, but he held his ground. He glanced back toward the girl. Her eyes were wet with tears, but she hadn't moved. She trusted him completely. That trust was a weight heavier than any weapon, but it also gave him strength he thought he no longer had. The fight was messy, desperate. These weren't trained soldiers, they were thugs, predators feeding off fear. But they were relentless. The man Shadow had taken down kicked wildly, trying to dislodge the dog, while the one with the pipe scrambled back to his feet, fury burning in his eyes. The soldier knew he couldn't let this drag on. Every second increased the chance that more would come. He drew his sidearm, his hand steady despite the storm in his chest. "Don't make me do this," he warned. His voice was cold, commanding, the voice of a man who had given countless warnings on countless battlefields. The man with the pipe froze, chest heaving, his eyes flicking from the gun to the girl, and then back again. For a moment, silence fell, the kind of silence where the world seems to hold its breath. Then slowly, the man lowered the pipe. "You'll regret this," he spat, backing away. "They'll find you." "They'll find her, and nothing will stop them." The soldier didn't answer. He kept his weapon trained until the men disappeared into the swirling snow. Only then did he lower it, his hand trembling, not from fear, but from the toll of carrying both the weight of the fight and the child's fragile hope. He crouched beside the girl, brushing the snow from her hair. "It's over," he murmured softly, though deep down he knew it was only the beginning. "You're safe now." Shadow returned to his side, muzzle smeared with blood, but eyes steady, loyal. The soldier placed a hand on the dog's head, grounding himself in the one bond that had never betrayed him. The girl sniffled, her voice barely audible. "Will they come back?" The soldier met her gaze, his heart twisting. He wanted to promise her no, to assure her that the nightmare was finished, but he had learned long ago never to make promises he couldn't keep. "They might," he admitted honestly. Then, with a firmness that wrapped around the fragile truth, he added, "But if they do, they'll have to go through me." And Shadow. "And we don't lose." Her small lips trembled, but she nodded, clinging to his jacket once more. For the first time since finding her, the soldier saw something in her eyes besides fear. It was faint, fragile, but it was hope. And in that moment, The soldier realized something he hadn't felt in years. For the first time since the war, since losing everything, he had a purpose again. The soldier's eyes remained fixed on the snow-covered street, his thoughts swirling like the flurries that danced in the wind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. The men he had fought were not just random thugs. They were part of something larger. The warning had been clear. They'll find you, they'll find her, and nothing will stop them. The soldier had spent years fighting battles that never seemed to end, both on the field and within himself. But now, with the girl in his arms and Shadow at his side, he knew that this was the fight that would define him. "You all right?" the soldier asked quietly, his voice softer now as he knelt beside the girl. Her face was pale, but there was a spark in her eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before. "I think so," she whispered, wiping her tear-streaked cheeks. "Will we be safe now?" The soldier hesitated for a moment. He wanted to tell her yes. He wanted to promise her that they would escape this nightmare, but the truth weighed heavily on him. There were more people after her, people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But there was no time to waste on false promises. He stood up and looked around. The street was empty now, the men gone, but the threat still loomed. He felt it in his gut, like the calm before the storm. They were safe, for now. But the world had a way of ripping safety away, especially when you least expected it. "Come on," the soldier said, offering his hand to the girl. "We need to keep moving." The girl nodded, her small hand slipping into his, and together they began walking down the street. Shadow trotted beside them, his keen eyes scanning their surroundings. The soldier led them through the labyrinth of streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder. He wasn't sure where they were headed. There was no safe place he could think of. The streets, the alleys, the abandoned buildings, none of them offered true shelter from the danger that was still out there. After a few blocks, they reached an old diner, the neon lights flickering above the cracked windows. It was the kind of place that had long been forgotten by time. The soldier paused in front of the door, assessing the situation. "This is as good as it gets for now," he muttered, his hand resting on the door handle. "Stay close." As they stepped inside, the dimly lit interior offered little comfort. The soldier scanned the room, his eyes sharp. It had been years since he'd needed to take refuge in a place like this, but the feeling of being hunted, of never knowing who might be watching, was all too familiar. The air inside was thick with dust, the silence broken only by the creak of old floorboards beneath their feet. The soldier led the girl to the back booth and sat across from her, his hand still resting protectively on her shoulder. Shadow laid down beside them, his large frame taking up most of the space, as if ready to spring into action at the slightest hint of danger. The soldier's fingers brushed against the dog's fur, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. "Are you hungry?" the soldier asked, his tone softer now, trying to calm the girl's nerves. She shook her head slightly, still trembling. "I'm not really hungry. I don't understand. Why do they want me?" The question hit the soldier harder than he expected. He had been so focused on getting them to safety that he hadn't thought about how much the girl had already been through, how much she needed to understand what was happening. He could see the fear and confusion in her eyes, the same look he had seen on the faces of those who had experienced war firsthand. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But I'll make sure you're safe. I swear it." The girl looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "You're not like the others." "You don't look like a bad person." The soldier paused, his throat tightening. "I'm not a bad person," he said, almost to himself. "But I've done things. I've seen things. Things I can't undo." She didn't respond, but her eyes, wide and trusting, spoke volumes. She believed him. She had to. He was all she had left. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of her gaze on him. He wasn't sure what kind of man he was anymore, but one thing was clear. He couldn't leave her behind, not like the others had. He wasn't going to let her be a victim, not on his watch. The soldier leaned back in the booth, his thoughts turning over the warning the man had given him. They'll find you, they'll find her. But who was they? And why did this girl matter so much to them? The questions burned in his mind, but answers remained just out of reach. Whoever these people were, they weren't ordinary criminals. The soldier had seen enough to know when something was bigger than it appeared. "Let's rest for a bit," the soldier said, trying to push the dark thoughts aside. He leaned his head against the cracked window, the cold glass offering little comfort. "We'll figure this out. Just stay close. Don't make a sound unless I tell you to." The girl nodded, her small body curled up against the booth, her eyes closing, exhaustion finally taking its toll. The soldier watched her for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt. She should have been safe by now. She should have been with someone who cared for her, someone who wasn't constantly running, always looking over their shoulder. But the reality was that they were both fugitives, and no matter how many times the soldier promised her safety, the danger was far from over. Outside, the night pressed in, thick with the weight of unknown threats. The soldier closed his eyes, his mind drifting back to the past, the life he had left behind, the comrades he had lost, and now a girl in need of protection, his second chance to do right. But for how long? Suddenly a sharp knock on the door broke the stillness of the diner, sending a shock of panic through the soldier's veins. He stood instantly, his hand moving toward his gun. Shadow was already on his feet, teeth bared, body taut. He motioned for the girl to stay down, signaling her to stay out of sight. The soldier moved toward the door, his body tense, the weight of the moment heavy on his chest. Who was out there? Another group of enemies? A friend? He couldn't afford to take chances. He cracked the door open just a sliver, enough to see who was on the other side. The soldier's fingers trembled as they brushed against the doorframe, the weight of the moment hanging over him like a thick fog. His gun was now gripped tightly in his hand, but he hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. Who could it be? Friend or foe? He peeked through the small crack in the door, keeping his body low and his movements controlled. The figure standing outside was tall and wrapped in a long dark coat, a silhouette barely discernible through the glass, yet there was something about the posture, the slow, deliberate movements that made the soldier uneasy. It wasn't the hurried rush of someone running for safety, it was something more calculated. The soldier's instincts screamed at him to be cautious. Every fiber of his training told him to retreat into the shadows, to remain unseen. But there was something in the way the figure stood, like they were waiting for something, a signal, a response, an invitation. He couldn't afford to let anyone know they were here, not when the danger was this close. His breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned back toward the girl, who was now sitting up, eyes wide with fear. The soldier motioned for her to stay down and out of sight, his heart hammering in his chest. She nodded obediently, but he could see the uncertainty in her gaze. She knew the stakes, even if she couldn't fully understand them. "Stay quiet," the soldier whispered, his voice low, a note of urgency in every word. "I'll handle this." He turned back to the door, preparing to shut it completely, but then he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper from the other side. "I know you're in there, soldier." The voice was smooth, calm, yet there was an unmistakable edge to it, one that made the soldier's blood run cold. This wasn't someone who was here by chance. They knew exactly who he was, and they knew what he had been doing. His grip tightened on the doorframe. The last thing he needed was to face another battle in this unfamiliar place, but his gut told him that whoever this was, they were no stranger to him. "You don't know what you're dealing with," the voice continued, almost taunting, yet there was a sense of finality to it, as if the speaker was offering him one last chance to make a choice. The girl. She's not just any child. She's a key, a piece of a larger puzzle. The soldier's mind raced. A key? What the hell is going on? His mind flashed to the threats from the men he'd fought earlier. They'll find you, they'd said. But why? Why was this girl so important? Taking a deep breath, the soldier braced himself. He could not afford to make a mistake here. With a sudden motion, he swung the door open, his weapon raised, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. To his surprise, there was no immediate attack. Instead, the man outside stepped into the faint light, revealing a face that the soldier recognized instantly, a face he had hoped never to see again. "Michael," the soldier muttered, lowering his gun, but still keeping it in hand. "What the hell are you doing here?" Michael stood in the doorway, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. His face had changed, hardened over the years, but the soldier could still see the same man who had been his closest friend in the service, a man who had once fought beside him in countless battles, a man who had vanished one day, leaving nothing but a trail of unanswered questions. "I could ask you the same thing," Michael replied, his voice smooth, but there was an undercurrent of something darker beneath his words. "But I already know the answer." "You've been protecting her, haven't you?" The girl, the soldier's pulse quickened, the pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to fall into place. This wasn't a chance encounter. Michael hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. He had been sent. And the girl, she was more than just a casualty in a fight she didn't understand. "She's not just some girl," the soldier replied, his tone sharp. "Who are you working for, Michael? What do they want with her?" Michael sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. "It's not about what they want, it's about what she is." "You don't understand, you never did. There's more at stake here than just her safety. And you—" He gestured toward the soldier. "You're just a pawn in this game." The soldier's jaw clenched. He had never trusted Michael completely, not even when they were serving together, but now his suspicions were confirmed. Michael wasn't just a man out for a paycheck. He had been a part of something bigger, something dangerous, and now that same darkness had found its way into the soldier's life. "You're telling me I've been risking everything for a key?" the soldier demanded, stepping forward, his voice low and dangerous. "What the hell does that mean?" Michael's eyes softened, and for a brief moment the soldier saw a flicker of regret, a reminder of the man he had once trusted. The girl, she's part of a project, a secret, something they started long ago, and now they'll do anything to control her. They already know you're involved. It's too late for you to turn back now. They'll find you, and they'll find her. The words hit the soldier like a punch to the gut. The past few days had been a whirlwind of danger, desperation, and decisions made on the fly. But this was bigger than anything he could have imagined. It was like a nightmare coming to life, and he was stuck in the middle of it with nowhere to run. "And if I just hand her over?" the soldier asked, voice tight with disbelief. "What happens then?" "They'll use her," Michael answered, his voice cold and distant. "She's a weapon, soldier, and you're the one who's going to help them unlock her potential." The soldier shook his head, his grip tightening on the gun. "You've lost your mind." Michael stepped forward, his gaze hardening. "You don't understand. This isn't just about a girl, it's about the future of everything you've fought for, and you're either with us or you're against us." The soldier's heart raced as Michael's words echoed in his mind. The future. The girl. A weapon? The soldier's breath hitched. He didn't have the answers. He didn't even know what the questions were. But one thing was clear. The danger was far from over, and now, more than ever, he needed to protect her. He couldn't afford to trust Michael. He couldn't afford to trust anyone. With a final glance at Michael, the soldier backed away, motioning for the girl to stay hidden. "Get out," he said firmly. "This ends tonight. You're not getting her?" Michael's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't the smile of a friend. It was the smile of a man who knew the truth and was willing to let the soldier burn for it. "You'll regret this," Michael said softly, his voice almost pitying. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the night. The soldier stood there, breath coming in ragged gasps, staring at the empty street. The world was closing in on him. He didn't have the luxury of regret. He had to protect the girl, no matter the cost. But as the door clicked shut behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was only just beginning. The soldier's mind was racing. The words Michael had spoken echoed in his thoughts like a drumbeat, growing louder with each passing second. The girl is a weapon. They'll use her. The soldier's hands trembled slightly as he checked his weapon once again, making sure it was ready. There was no time to second-guess himself. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. The girl, still huddled against the booth, was watching him closely. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she had an odd calm about her, as though she sensed that the soldier wasn't just her protector, but her only hope. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, as though she was waiting for something, waiting for him to give her something she hadn't had in a long time. Hope. He had promised her safety, but now he wasn't even sure if he could keep that promise. The door to the diner creaked open, and the soldier tensed, his hand on the handle of his gun. He wasn't sure if it was Michael returning, or if this was something worse, but he couldn't let his guard down. "Stay behind me," he whispered to the girl, his voice low but firm. The girl nodded silently, her small form retreating further into the booth. Shadow, who had been resting at the soldier's feet, immediately sprang to attention, ears upright, ready for whatever was about to come. A figure stepped into the diner, and the soldier's heart sank. It wasn't Michael. It was worse. 3 men, dressed in black tactical gear, entered the diner, their eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency. The leader, a man with cold, steely eyes, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He wasn't here to talk. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here for one thing: the girl. "Move aside," the leader ordered in a low, commanding voice. "We know you're with her. Hand her over." The soldier stood his ground, gun raised slightly, the barrel steady in his grip. He was outnumbered, but he wasn't going to back down, not this time, not when it was a matter of life or death for the girl. "I'm not handing her over to you," the soldier said, his voice unwavering. "You're not taking her." The man's eyes narrowed as he studied the soldier, then glanced at Shadow, who was now growling softly, a low rumble emanating from the back of his throat. The canine was ready to protect his master and the girl. The leader motioned to his men, and without warning, one of them lunged forward, aiming to disarm the soldier. But Shadow was faster. With a sharp bark, the dog darted forward, leaping at the man, knocking him off balance, and sending him crashing into a nearby table. The soldier's reflexes kicked in. He swung his gun up, taking aim at the second man, who had just reached for his own weapon. A single shot rang out, and the man collapsed, clutching his shoulder. The soldier didn't pause to check if the man was alive. He didn't have the time. The leader, now furious, stepped forward, pulling a pistol from his side, aiming it at the soldier. "You think you can stop us? You're out of your depth. You don't understand what you're protecting. She's not just a girl, she's a weapon, and we'll do whatever it takes to get her." The soldier's eyes narrowed. A weapon. Michael had said the same thing. But now, standing face to face with the leader, the soldier realized something. These men, these people, didn't understand the girl. They didn't understand what she had been through, or what it meant to protect someone who had been abandoned by the world. "Then you're as much a fool as I am," the soldier said, his voice cold, unwavering. "Because I'll protect her with my life. And if you want to take her, you'll have to go through me." The leader's face twisted with anger, but before he could raise his gun, Shadow sprang again, this time with even greater force. The dog tackled the leader to the ground, knocking the pistol out of his hand. The soldier rushed forward, not hesitating. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the leader, flipping him onto his back with the strength of his training. The man struggled beneath him, but the soldier was relentless. With one swift motion, he grabbed the man's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to the floor. "You're not taking her," the soldier said again, his voice like steel. The leader grunted, his face pressed into the cold floor. "You'll regret this. She's not just a girl. She's part of a program, a project that can change everything, and you're just a tool in their hands." The soldier's heart raced. A program. But the leader's words no longer mattered. He had seen enough, heard enough, to understand that whatever this program was, it wasn't worth sacrificing the girl's life. She wasn't a weapon. She was a child, an innocent life that had been swept up in something much larger than any of them. The soldier stood up, pulling the leader to his feet and pushing him toward the door. "Get out," he growled. "If you ever come back, I'll make sure you don't leave." The leader, humiliated and defeated, spat on the floor, but said nothing more. His men had already gathered their fallen comrades, and without another word, retreated out the door into the night, disappearing into the shadows. The soldier didn't let his guard down until the last of the men had vanished. Only then did he lower his weapon, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He turned to the girl who was now standing, her eyes wide with awe and fear. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice softening. She nodded, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. It wasn't just fear, it was a quiet understanding. "I don't know what's happening," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But I think I trust you." The soldier knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze. "You don't need to understand everything. You just need to know this. You're safe now. As long as I'm breathing, I won't let them take you." She smiled weakly, her small hand reaching out to rest against his arm, a small gesture of trust in return. Shadow, who had been watching the whole time, walked over and sat beside them, his head tilted as if he understood the significance of the moment. The soldier's heart felt a little lighter. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They were still alive, still standing. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. The battle wasn't over. But for tonight, they had won. The soldier took a deep breath, standing up, the weight of the world still pressing on him, but not as heavy as before. He glanced out the window at the dark, snow-covered streets. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, but for now, he had a mission. And he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. "Let's go," he said, his voice firm once more. "We've got a long road ahead." And with that, the three of them, soldier, K9 and girl, stepped out into the night, the cold air biting, but their hearts steady. Together, they would face whatever came next.